Good morning, Javier.
Good morning.
How
Good
are
morning.
you?
Very good. Thanks so
Um,
much.
well, thank you for being here with us. And Ambassador Solomon, thanks for those opening words. You referred to today's forum as proceedings, so that got my attention, and I certainly straightened up when I heard that. So we're going to try to keep the proceedings on time and running efficiently. So we've got a few uh, questions that we wanted to explore with Javier in his capacity as global head of sustainability and corporate investment banking for. Do I get to call it BBVA or is it BBVA? You tell me which way you
It
want me to
depends on
go.
which country you are.
Okay.
In Mexico, they suffer a lot to say
Pues soy
BBVA.
portugués americano, so I'm more ibérico, but um, so what we want to tease out is a little bit about Javier, your views and approach to sustainability and what the energy transition profile is looking like from a global financier's perspective today. Let me start from kind of a 30,000 foot perspective and ask you, can you just talk to us a little bit about BBVA's kind of global posture and strategic goals when it comes to sustainability and energy transition broadly?
Yes. Okay. The journey for us started 2010, 2011, when we realized that the need to decarbonize the planet was urgent, and we started the inroad of understanding what was happening, how we could help. Moving forward in 2018, we realized that in order for us as a private bank, as a private institution to move the needle, we needed to really embrace the sustainability and the investments in decarbonization as a business, as a profitable business, not as something that we did just to help others or save the planet, but because we have our shareholders and we need to invest profitably. So let me throw a few figures to put everything in perspective. In 2018, we thought that we could mobilize from 2018 to 2025 100 billion euros. Looked like challenging at that time, but we started the journey of mobilizing this business, mostly lending for us as a bank. We soon realized that it was a very small target, and we increased it to 200 billion, I'm talking euros. And a couple of years later, we increased it to 300 billion, 3 times the original target. And in 2024, 1 year before our plan, we reached 304 billion. So just to put it in perspective how this has grown exponentially, I would say. Now, there was 8 years, okay? Now we have a new plan, and up to 2029, we plan to invest 700 billion. And it's 5 years instead of 8. So that puts you in perspective. When we thought a few years ago that 100 billion was going to be very challenging in 8 years, now we have a target that is going to be 700 billion in 5 years. That puts you in perspective. And we are just one bank which is investing seriously here. Combine that with all the financial sector, not only banks, but non-banking financial institutions, asset managers. It's probably the biggest investment effort that the world has put on its shoulders historically.
That's incredible. Just to contemplate those numbers and that evolution over an 8 year period. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, and it's something kind of from an organizational standpoint, but I find it interesting. And I suspect there might be an evolution over this 8 year timeline. But I wanted to know for BBVA in terms of its sustainability goals and policies, how much of that kind of was a result, maybe originally, from meeting your clients' expectations and mirroring your clients and anticipating what they are going to be in terms of BBVA being a debt capital partner to so many of your clients, and how much of that was the pull of kind of public policy and the kind of emergent regulatory framework, particularly in Europe. I suspect you're going to say that the evolution certainly was driven much more by the market opportunities than the regulatory framework. But I'm just interested in a little bit of perspective as to how that started and how we got here.
Well, I would say the answer, it depends. So in some regions of the world, it's more pushed by supervision and politicians. In some regions of the world, it's pure economics. So, but in our case, we serve our clients. So basically, we follow what they want to do. In all sectors, all sectors: aviation, shipping, agriculture, cement, steel, real estate, oil and gas, power. In all sectors, all companies, leading companies, are investing in their new factories, the new lines, making sure that they emit less greenhouse gases, irrespective of who governs in which country. If you are gonna make now a factory or a power plant, let's say, that is gonna last 70 years, you don't care who is now the president of XYZ country, right? So you really want to make sure that this is gonna last decades, and obviously you want to do it making sure that you emit less CO2 or any greenhouse gas. So we follow our clients. And what we realize going sector by sector is that some clients get it faster than others. So we've created something because, and for us, banking business is pretty straightforward. You have to lend to people and they have to give it back, the money with an interest. Pretty straightforward. So basically, sometimes if they have difficulties, they don't give the money back. So what we do is we've created something called the TRI, Transition Risk Indicator. So for each sector, we evaluate each client, realizing that some of them are more advanced in what is needed, what needs to be done, and some others are less advanced. And we give them literally a ranking from 1 to 9, 9 being the worst. So we identify each client in each sector, which TRI they have, and we are willing to lend more and help, well, lend more to those who have better TRI, and help more advising those who have a worse situation in order for them to catch up with the leaders, and we being able to bank everyone. So basically what we've been doing is literally follow our clients in each of the sectors I mentioned. But then you asked about the policies. Obviously, for these investments to be profitable for everyone and for the companies to be able to pay back their debt and invest their equity profitably, they sometimes, for some technologies, they need some public help. Now, for instance, deploying solar, deploying onshore wind doesn't require really any help. It's about making it at industrial scale, and basically the whole world is now installing solar and installing onshore wind profitably without any need of tax breaks. And 55% of the technologies needed in the world to decarbonize are already economically viable. The remaining 45% requires some public help, and that's what, for instance, Europe is, I would say, more advanced or more committed in terms of helping with the taxpayer money and with right incentives, demand signals, contracts for difference, and so on. And Europe is more in policy-driven. The US was in the previous administration with a huge push policy-driven. Current administration is more purely pragmatic. So basically, it depends, and it varies per region. And we, as a private institution, and all our clients as private institutions as well, they need to do the right thing, invest, as I said, decades-long type of decisions, and adapt to the help or incentives that the different governments in different countries provide.
Yeah, nothing that you just said is relevant to some of the recent changes in the U.S. That's for sure. We'll get to that, but
I guess we'll get to that.
Yes. You hear the words energy transition thrown around quite a bit. That's a very broad term. Can you talk a little bit about, you were just talking about those kinds of technologies that kind of don't require today the kind of government support and investments that were required in decades past. Can you talk about where BBVA sees market opportunities in clean energy, clean tech, in the energy transition broadly, and maybe how that landscape of market opportunities has evolved over the last, 5 or so years?
Yes, so as we commented, for everything is about energy. So all sectors need energy one way or another. A plane, a ship, real estate needs to cool or to heat buildings. So everything is about energy. How do you produce this energy? Decades ago, it was mostly hydrocarbons. Now it's changing dramatically, and it's becoming more and more electrified, and this electricity is more and more without greenhouse gases. Let me provide a few percentages, because people are not aware of which huge percentage of the world electricity is already without greenhouse gases emissions. US is 40%, including nuclear and renewable, 40-something percent. Europe, on average, is 68%. Spain is 76%. That includes hydro and nuclear, of course. More importantly, in the last last 3 years, 80% of the new electricity generation has been wind and solar. So the world is being hugely electrified, and most of the new electricity is coming without greenhouse gases. With which technologies? Years ago, wind and solar required tax break, required help, required subsidies, so we followed the power utilities invested with this help. But then there has been a 90%, approximately 90% in the different technologies, decreasing cost for providing this type of technology. So again, this is super economic already, no need for further subsidies. Now, where are we seeing the opportunities to start lending profitably as well? Geothermal has advanced in the last 5 years hugely. Biogas, biofuels, carbon capture becoming huge here in the US, in the UK, in Europe. Hydrogen requires help, green hydrogen I mean, requires help by the government, but Europe provides these helps, already profitable with the tax breaks, I insist. Investment in the power grids. This is what probably one of the pending aspects, because basically the investment in the grids, it goes in the it goes directly to the electricity price, and that's not very particularly popular to increase electricity prices anywhere. So this requires the agreement of politicians again to make it possible to increase electricity prices, and that requires huge investments. And very importantly, in the last decade, the world increased, in the whole decade, increased the demand of electricity worldwide by just 7%. So there was not a huge increase in demand of electricity. For the next decade, the expectation is 50% increase in demand of electricity. You have all been seeing and reading and talking about AI, huge needs of electricity. EVs are being deployed worldwide, some places faster than others. The whole fleet of cars in a few decades is going to be electric, and they are going to be getting electricity and producing electricity when they have excess. So the electrification of the world is huge. We're talking about a 50% increase in demand versus 7% in the last decade, and most of it coming again with technologies that don't emit greenhouse gases.
So, I'm really interested, and this will be too in the weeds, and so maybe at some point, if we're sharing a glass of wine or something, I'd love to get your thoughts on what your expectations are in terms of grid infrastructure investments in North America, but sort of in Europe and in throughout the Americas. I'd be very interested in that, but let me not go down that rabbit hole here. You know, let's transition to speaking of the energy transition. You know, the rapid policy shifts. Let's approach it from a diplomatic way, and sort of the very rapidly shifting policy posture in the U.S. towards renewable energy, and in a broader sense, kind of climate policy and sustainability. You know, if you could be as direct as possible, you know, to what extent are those, is the shifting creating you know, meaningful headwinds for BBVA in terms of your business lending into renewable projects and other kinds of energy transition projects, and associated sort of the corporate ecosystem that supports that kind of build? I'd just be interested. You know, we get massive tax, you know, subsidies in, and then we get, you know, massive tax subsidies out, plus some, you know, penalties as an extra favor to the industry.
Well, I would say it's been slightly exaggerated, the effects that the Inflation Reduction Act was going to have, and the effects that the One Big Beautiful Bill is going to have. In my humble opinion, and we've taken a very close look at both legislations. Starting with the Inflation Reduction Act, by the way, there are these two terrible names for a legislation, because the Inflation Reduction Act didn't decrease inflation.
Had nothing
and
to
the
do
One
with
Big
it.
Beautiful Bill, I think it's I don't know.
Enough
it's
said.
It's one, but I'm not sure it's big and beautiful. So the Inflation Reduction Act provided tax breaks for wind and solar that were not required. So honestly, using taxpayer money for something that is economically viable, I think I understand it had its critics. As a matter of fact, for banks, companies who were investing with these tax breaks were asking us for some types of financing that for us were not profitable. Okay, so that's one aspect. It was, I would say, to an extreme, giving incentives to technologies that didn't require this type of incentives. Now, these incentives to some specific technologies, EVs, solar in households. This is basically going. So if you want an EV or you want to install a solar panel, you do the numbers without the tax break, and it still works, but it's going to be slower. Then for utility scale, it's phased out for wind and solar in mid-2026. So what we are experiencing is that people are running more than before the One Big Beautiful Bill. So this is for these two technologies. But then for other technologies like nuclear, very relevant for decarbonize the planet, biofuels, carbon capture, hydrogen, for all this, the One Big Beautiful Bill is even better.
Batteries.
It's even better. Batteries. But it's even better than the IRA. So am I saying that the One Big Beautiful Bill is better to decarbonize the US than the IRA? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that companies are pragmatic, banks are pragmatic, the investments in the United States in decarbonizing the different sectors are going to continue. As a matter of fact, we are now facing a peak and are going to continue. Some technology will go faster than others. And nobody was expecting that the huge boost in demand that we were going to have from AI. So it's a bit of a all of the above type of needs. Are CCGTs, combined cycle gas turbines, being built in the US? Yes. Now, as a matter of fact, now the problem is there's the lack of turbines themselves. So it's, as I said, it's an all of the above type of strategy. We are going to see huge deployments of renewables. We're going to see gas. We're going to see nuclear. And we are going to see basically everything. Everything is needed.
So let me just drill down on one of the things that you said, and so is it fair to say that from BBVA's perspective, one of the things that has been experienced apart from the change in the policy, in the US change in policy towards renewables and climate, broadly speaking, there's been a lot of market uncertainty. And is that, which has had a lot of market players, delaying or forestalling investment decisions and the like. We've seen the effects flow through the economy in certain ways. However, when we're talking about BBVA's lending into energy transition, into the energy transition space broadly, and you just mentioned the last 3 years, everybody, I mean, you probably all have ChatGPT on your phones now at this point. The energy usage demand is it's created an exponential increase in the demand curve for power. So in practice, has it been counterbalanced, or has those policy shifts created in uncertainty reverberations with your clients actually flowed through to what you've seen in terms of deal flow and deal execution?
There's been uncertainty, clearly, when there's been changes in government in all countries, and companies need to take their decisions based on what policy they're facing in each country. But again, the decisions that companies make to create a new plant for a new factory, decide to move, if you are a car manufacturer, if you want to move faster or slower to hybrids or to electric, or if you are an airline provider, if you're going to use more or less SAF, and on and on. These decisions, as I said, take decades. So yes, there's been some uncertainty that's delayed a few months, some decisions, but in general, we see all sectors and all companies, basically there hasn't been a hard stop in any of the major investment that we had been providing. And as a matter of fact, now there's pretty much clarity. The new law is there, everybody can understand, read, and decide. So in general, we haven't seen a slowdown, a relevant slowdown in investments.
So I'm getting the signs over there. They're going to probably start playing the piano here to indicate that the time is up. Are there any parting thoughts that you wanted to share with us in terms of kind of the go forward perspective in the energy transition and sustainability space?
Yes, I'm going to take advantage of these three flags. We've been talking too much probably about the US because we are here. It's the most relevant country in the world, but the world is very big. Europe is still pushing big time for decarbonization. Latin America, Mexico, is clearly in the last few years been pushing much more than with the previous administrations. China is taking this hugely. Is the country which is electrifying the fastest. So World is big. This is about collaboration. I know there's a lot of moves back and forth with tariffs and the types of relationships that the world is going to be embracing. But I would say that in general, I encourage all companies, multinational companies, to really look at the big picture, adapt to different politicians, legislations, and situations. But in general, be aware that the world is big. All the investments are being done by everyone without taking into account that this is about lower emissions. Climate change is real. Climate change is real. And we need energy to continue providing the growth of different sectors. Emerging markets need to grow. There's a huge amount of the population that needs to catch up with the type of life that we have in Europe or the US. So in reality, I want to just finalize with a very optimistic message that this is about continue investing, transforming all different sectors at different paces, and about investing. And for that, the blood of these investments is obviously the money needed, finance, and here we are BBVA and many of the banks also helping with this endeavor.
Javier, we're grateful for your time, for your sense of optimism. I will tell you, in my case, it's been better than my morning cup of coffee. So
thank you very much.
What a delightful start.
Thanks so much.